Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You know, some people have difficulty with the concept of somebody like myself living nearly 4,000 miles away from Manitowoc, having the gumption, if you like, to contact the Sheriff's Department over there in Manitowoc. And as I say, I'm 4,000 miles away. There's a lot of people that are a lot further. And some people would say, well, you know, when it comes to Wisconsin and what happened to Steve and Brendan, well, it's your circus, it's your monkeys, is an old Polish saying. But of course, what is it that made Making a Murderer stand out so much? Well, it's so many things. The first thing that always springs to mind is the appalling press conference by Ken Kratz, which in any other country, civilized country, Stephen Avery would not have been put on trial following that press conference. There's no way here, anywhere in the UK, that that trial would have gone ahead following his press conference. I've got a list here of some of the most appalling aspects. You know, the things that we watched both in Making a Murderer 1 and have since discovered about the case that has really outraged us. Another thing would be Peg Leitzelager report. When she investigates, she sends investigators to find out what happened. We do, of course, find out in Series 1 that the phone call back in '95 was not reported to the Attorney General's office. And as I've said before, that was one of the reasons why the civil suit jumped from 1.2 million to 36 million. Of course, we are appalled at the way that Steve was framed the first time round, that everybody wanted him guilty, and despite the fact that he was able to produce so many witnesses to say that he was at the salvage yard all that time, he was still found guilty. And of course that had a devastating effect on Steve and his very young family. And the sort of damage that that wrongful conviction has done to that is absolutely appalling. We're also appalled, of course, by the lack of any ethics in general. But of course, high on that list would be the lack of ethics, would be the behaviour of Len Kaczynski and Mike O'Kelly. But there's been enough said about, written about that pair. One of the things that really surprised me was the disregard over the conflict of interest. You know, from the Manitowoc County point of view, only one official was barred due to the conflict of interest, and that was of course the coroner, who had nothing to do with the civil suit. However, Conrad Pete Bates discovered, and he's actually mentioned this in a previous video, that the coroner was called to a road traffic accident. And when she arrived, she found a couple of sheriffs in a state of deep, deep shock. Apparently, in arriving at the scene, they had actually ran over the traffic victim. So that was like he'd been hit twice. And the big problem was that when they spoke to her about her report, she said, well, look, if it turns out that the cause of death was being hit a second time, that will be in my report. And of course the sheriffs did not like that at all. They wanted her to say that he was already dead before they accidentally ran over him. And this was the that one of the big problems was that they realised that the coroner, Deborah Kakach, I think her name is, that she was not going to be fobbed off at all. Wiegert and Fassbender conducted the most appalling tunnel vision investigation imaginable. We're told again by Pete Bates that it was Ken Kratz that pointed them in which directions to look and which directions not to look. So Wiegert and Fassbender, the worst investigation in the world ever, and the most appalling interrogation of Brendan. But you know, the legal system, the whole process of this making a murderer, the quality of what we saw is surely reflected by the complete lack of proper journalism. My daughter, youngest daughter, told me about Making a Murderer while she was through in Glasgow doing a journalism course. And she watched Making a Murderer when it first came out back in February of 2016. My wife and I were out on a night out with Emily. We visited a few bars, and at one of them Emily asked me, "Dad, would the police frame an innocent man?" And I said, "No, absolutely not. You know, they wouldn't. They want the truth." She says, "Well, you're going to have to watch this Making a Murder thing, you know." And she said, and the nephew confessed. And I said, "Well, there you go then. You know, that proves that this guy must be guilty if the nephew has confessed, because people don't confess wrongfully, do they?" Little did I know. So when she came back from Glasgow a couple of weeks later, that's what she insisted that we do, was start watching Making a Murderer. In fact, her very first question on the night out was, "Dad, have you ever heard of a place called Manitowoc?" Sometimes I wish I'd never heard of Manitowoc. But I am looking forward to going there myself and meeting up with the supporters. But let's get back to the journalism. The journalists, as far as I'm concerned, are completely and utterly rubbish in their job. We've seen recently that video done by the Texas Law University, where one of the professors talks about the email, the original Ken Kratz email, that was simply sent, copy and pasted to all the various news agencies, and they simply parroted the rubbish that Kratz was pointing out about things that Making a Murderer had left out the first time round. And the fact that they're just so happy to regurgitate this rubbish. And I realised that some of the journalists that covered the case originally, some of them are classed as truthers, some of them are classed as guilters. I don't really see that very much. All I see are people desperate to sell as many copies of their newspaper or to get their articles heard, read, listened to. And a lot of the time, all they're doing is reflecting public opinion, which is definitely not the way that an investigative journalist should work. For me, obviously I've said it before, one of the best journalists to cover the case, John Farrak, excellent stuff, and some of his other colleagues at the Post Crescent have also done some excellent stuff. I remember a name, Alison Durr. She's taken over and done some, and there's been one or two others. Yes, we've also have some very colourful journalists. I would put that somebody like Chad Keller as a colourful journalist. He's, if you like, one extreme. On the opposite extreme, you've got the village idiot, as I refer to him, Dan O'Donnell. He even apparently suggested that the lack of photographs was, well, that was normal practice. You don't have to have photographs of everything, of the burn pit, you know. But as I say, for me, it's quite clear that journalists, they have their own agenda. It has nothing at all to do with finding the truth. You know, as I said, unfortunately, when it comes to Wisconsin, to a certain extent, yes, it is your circus, your monkeys. And you never ever thought that people thousands of miles away would take an interest in it. And of course we have, thanks to Making a Murderer. But now, Wisconsin, now is the time for everybody over there to get your act together and to sort this farce out. And in doing so, set in places frameworks that are going to help in the future. Anyway, that's about all I've got time for today. Catch you again soon. Bye for now.